Good morning. Can you hear? Is the sound good? There's no green light on this one. Hello, is that working?
That's working.
Is that good? Very good. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session on unleashing the power of climate technology. We may have a relatively small audience in the room, but I believe there's also an audience online. So delighted that we have all of you with us today. My name's Charmian Keynes. I'm a senior partner at BCG. I'm based in our London office and have been with BCG for over 30 years. And I lead our topic of adaptation and resilience. So let me just quickly introduce our panelists today. And we have a fantastic panel. And being a technology session, we of course have some online as well. So we have, at the end of the panel here, we have Sadani Alexander. He's the Vice President of Policy and Strategy of AIIB. We have Mr. Masamba Chioi, who's head of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. We have Mr. Jay Ko, who is Managing Director of Lightsmith Group. And then online, we have Mr. Ian Zhu, Managing Partner of Neo Capital. And we also have, I hope you will see him in a second, Mr. Jackie Abitbol, who is Managing Partner of Cathay Capital. So those are our panelists today. So just a few words of introduction on what this session is about. So, and then firstly, I'll just say from a BCG perspective, in any industry we work with, but particularly when we think about the battle against climate change, technology is always the backbone. And I think we've all heard the statistic quoted by the experts at IEA suggesting that actually 50% of global emission reduction could be achieved by technologies that are actually sort of in production or in development at the moment. And of course those range from AI-driven analytics in agriculture to track emission reduction or carbon sequestration, EV, hydrogen, smart grids, all of these things vital to mitigation. And of course we can talk about the successes of solar and wind, where technologies really, they've been proven and they're cost competitive and we have traction, they're scaled up. But I think it's also fair to say that whilst there is investment flowing into this, actually most of that investment today is very focused on net zero and gaining traction on the mitigation side of things. ANR lags behind. This is the COP of ANR. I think we're seeing much less technology going into that. We know there are challenges in the technology space around how do we actually both have impact, get the commercial returns, get the traction and adoption. And we also know that there are challenges in actually getting this to happen in parts of the world that need it most from an adaptation and resilience perspective, as well as a mitigation perspective. So what this session is all about is really trying to get at questions around how can we really accelerate the supply of both innovative and commercially viable technologies, both in general and across the developing world. And then we're also going to spend a bit of time in the second half of the session on what actually is the role of MDBs in that, and what can they do, together obviously with the many other actors involved, to really support both the financing and the development and adoption of technologies in climate. So that's the introduction to this session. We have a set of questions, and I'm going to start off really giving each of our panelists an opportunity to talk about what their organization does in the space of climate technology. And I'm going to start with Sadani and say that AIIB is a young MDB. Young is probably a word that's been used to describe MDB. Established in 2016, so it's the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and from the outset committed to having operations fully aligned to the Paris Agreement, and on top of that have set an ambitious target of having 50% of overall approved financing directed towards climate finance by 2025. In addition to that, tech-enabled infrastructure is one of the 4 pillars I think you have in your strategy, Sadani. So I wonder whether you could perhaps share with us how AIIB envisages the role of technology in accelerating climate mitigation and adaptation and the approaches that you're taking.
Thank you, Charmaine, and I want to start by thanking all of the panelists. We've got a wonderful panel here who have deep experience in the role of technology in climate, and I'm particularly proud to say there's 2 AIIB investee companies here with we need to invest in some new microphone technology. with Lightsmith and with Neo on the screen, and so particularly pleased to see you guys here, and I hope there'll be more such investments in future. And you know, in a way, you could say AIIB is a startup MDB, right? So we, you know, 7 years ago, the bank started operation, January 2016. That's when I joined the bank, and today we are from the 57 founding members, we have 105 members. We have this great reputation for our high standards of governance, the high standards we bring to our projects. We're building a growing portfolio around the world, and as you said, we have, you know, strong ambitions around climate and around technology. So we see the role of technology is absolutely critical to meeting the climate challenge, both on mitigation and adaptation. And adaptation, I think, is a key issue which we should discuss here, because it is, you know, it's been a little bit the Cinderella of the climate debate for a while, and it really needs to come to the ball now. And we, I think in AIIB, we also have seen, and I'm sure Jay will talk about this with the work of Lightsmith, the critical role that new technology can also play in respect of adaptation, as well as in mitigation. And I guess there are two issues. One is, how do we develop the new technologies, as you said? Some of those technologies may not have been invented. Others are really, you know, nascent and need to scale. And you can see with what's happened with solar, the very rapid curve you have to go through from innovation to large-scale deployment in order to make the technology work. And so on areas like hydrogen, storage, carbon capture and utilization and storage technologies, you know, these are all critical to many countries' long-term strategies and NDCs. And so MDBs have a role in supporting innovation. That probably means taking a bit more risk on innovation than perhaps MDBs have been comfortable with historically. But then the second part is, how do you support the rollout of those technologies? And especially in emerging markets, that's often been a challenge, where it can take a long time from a new technology being developed to being able to be rolled out around the world. And yet, many of the biggest climate challenges, both on mitigation and adaptation, are in the developing world. And there are also opportunities for countries to leapfrog to the best new technology. And so I think there's a critical role for MDBs and for AIIB in supporting that. So we see the role of technology is absolutely critical. We see our role as a financier in supporting the development and backing the scale up of new technologies. And you know, we intend to do a lot more of that in future.
Thank you, Sir Danny. And you mentioned there that Lightsmith, a private equity firm, is pretty much a pioneer in climate adaptation, or described as such. And I wondered, Jay, if you could explain to us perhaps the rationale behind that focus, and you know, actually some of the areas that you're particularly looking into at the moment.
Thank you, Charmaine. Really appreciate it. It's so wonderful to be here in the MDB Pavilion with Sir Danny and a range of different partners. Particularly the good work that's being done by BCG in sort of thinking about strategically adaptation and mitigation. And thank you for the question about adaptation technology. I really like the Cinderella coming to the ball part of this. I mean, this is the implementation COP, but I really do believe that we have the first steps in the adaptation universe as well, right? We really have now mobilization of finance beginning, particularly engagement, I think, which has been very difficult to do with the private sector. So just backing up, my name is Jay Coe. I'm one of the co-founders and managing directors at the Lightsmith Group. We are the sponsors of an investment strategy called CRAFT, the Climate Resilience and Adaptation Finance and Technology Transfer Facility. That's a very long name, except for anywhere but COP, where CRAFT is a reasonable acronym, I suppose. And it has the distinction of being the first private investment fund dedicated to adaptation and climate resilience. And that seems strange in the context of how long we've been talking about adaptation and mitigation, but at least there's one. If you look at the current climate statistics from the Climate Policy Initiative, it's still less than 8% of tracked finance globally that is in the climate space can be attributed to adaptation. And less than $500 million of that has anything to do with the private sector in adaptation. So $185 million, which is where we achieved final close with the support of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Thank you, Danny, and the leadership at the bank being able to really move forward into this new area and begin to drive it forward. So what do we mean by climate adaptation technology? And in our view, what we have thought about is a tool strategy at this point in time. There are many technologies and solutions that are out there that can help us to first understand what the path of climate change is going to be like in different parts of the economy and different parts of society. That is agricultural analytics, geospatial information, satellite imagery, supply chain analytics. We're seeing massive disruptions of the supply chain, analysis of catastrophe risk modeling, weather analytics, weather modeling. How are these impacts going to really start to play out so we can look into the future and plan for the future with that technology as we scale it, not just for OECD countries, but absolutely and as quickly as possible in developing countries as well. And then products and services like resilient food systems, drip irrigation, salinity resistant, drought resistant seeds, cold chain storage, much more development and deployment of technology across the supply chain so we can reduce food waste in the supply chain in developing countries. All of these, all the above strategies. And then water harvesting, water efficiency, water management, water reuse. Lots of technologies that if they could be dropped in cost following the kind of example of the solar PV market, then we could get them deployed as quickly as possible in the places that are going to be increasingly vulnerable. So that is the focus of the Lightsmith Craft strategy, which is to invest in companies in these different sectors. But I would encourage everyone to think about adaptation technology as even being more broad than that. For example, medical diagnostics might not spring to your mind as a climate change technology, but we're moving disease vectors around, waterborne, airborne disease. Respiratory ailment is changing because we're now having extremely large wildfires in places we've never had wildfires before. And so as we face this uncertainty of the environment, and unfortunately the kind of certainty around climate change, scaling up the technologies that we have, the tools to attack the problem that we're now going to face, and doing it systemically together, I think is the critical focus that we have here. So that's what we're doing in the climate adaptation and resilience area.
Thank you, Jay. I was talking with some investors yesterday around irrigation systems, which, you know, in the developing world, $1,000 a pop for a farmer. If you could actually reduce that by 50% in price for the farmer, you'll get a 600% uptake. You know, we'll move into this, but how do we actually scale up these technologies, particularly in the developing world? Which actually takes me to Jackie, if I may, managing partner of Cathay Capital. So Cathay Capital is an investment firm with a business model and platform, it says in its annual reports, to connect local ecosystems across 4 continents. So apart from the very well-known work that Cathay Capital does on the consumer side, I wondered, Jackie, whether you could sort of talk to us a little bit about how you are addressing sustainability and climate change, but also this point around different continents, and what are the important geographical differences that you're seeing when it comes to financing climate technology. So Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and happy to be here, even though I'm remotely. So on our side, I mean, as Cathay, so we are a global firm, okay, and since the inception of the venture activity, so we've been investing heavily in sustainable related technologies. So it's not only about you know, the type of companies that we have in our portfolio, but also what these technologies are bringing to the world and how they're addressing some of these challenges that we have today. As part of our investors, actually, we have some of the largest corporates in the world addressing renewable energies, addressing, I mean, mobility, addressing some of the issues that are directly related to sustainability. And one of the things that we've done, besides, as I said, the investment, is also to set up dedicated funds, okay, to address those needs. So with dedicated team, so we have in China a smart tech fund, okay, so investing only in, I would say, EV companies or EV related technologies. We have a car tech fund as well. And overall, what we've noticed is that our best investments, so the one who are bringing I would say the highest return to the firm, have been in companies related to climate change. And this is, I mean, initially it was quite surprising because actually when we started, we had certain verticals of interest, and one of them being energy and mobility, because the technology and the market and the trends were moving in that direction. We found out that it's not only that the market is going there, but it is also that there is a demand, there's an appetite for this type of technologies from a commercial point of view. And this is why we've put in place So we are investing now out of our third fund, which is a 1 billion euros fund, so across different geographies, as you mentioned. So we are investors. So we have, we are very present in China, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the US, and that gives us, let's say, an overview of what's going on there. And actually, we're seeing that the needs are pretty similar when it comes to, I would say, the source of the need. Okay. So we're talking about, natural catastrophe. We're talking about AI for satellite images to monitor, methane emissions, for instance. However, the difference is that not every region is at the same level. Not every region has the same, I would say, investments being done from an infrastructure point of view to just investment in technologies point of view. So how are we addressing that? So two things is, one, we've put in place a methodology that we are monitoring when we source deals. So there is an exclusion list. So there is a complete, not mindset, but really a process. Okay. So to invest in companies which are addressing some of these needs. And then there is a set of KPIs that we ask the entrepreneurs to monitor. So they sign, there is a chart that we put in place with the entrepreneurs, and we I'd say not only when we do the investment, but also during the investment period, we keep on I would say a quarterly basis. Okay, we're trying to improve that. To put it on a monthly basis, but there is a pace also of implementing those KPIs and those processes, but also on a quarterly basis, as I said. So we have a report, okay, from every single company in our portfolio that has to commit, and that we monitor. So this is I would say our way to make sure that the commitment that the entrepreneurs are taking initially when we do our investments are supported and are, I would say, maintained along our investment period.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for that. I hope that's working. I'd like to now actually bring in the public sector, and I'm going to look to Massamba. So Massamba is the head of the UN Global Innovation Hub, which is part of the UN Climate Change Agency. It was launched in November 2021, I believe, so also young. And your aim is to promote the transformation for both low emission and climate resilient technologies. I suspect for this audience, some of what you're perhaps not as known as some of the other organizations that we've been talking about. So it'd be really great if you could explain a little bit about what you do, but also your observations on climate technology when working with the different types of stakeholders that you see acting in this space. Thank you.
So good morning to the audience, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are following us virtually. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are following us virtually. My name is Massamba Choi. I'm leading the Global Innovation Hub within the UNFCCC Secretariat, and I'm very pleased to be here and to participate to this very important panel. And I would like to thank AIIB for giving me the opportunity. So the Global Innovation Hub was launched at COP26 to address mainly two challenges. The first is the fact that innovation is mainly focusing currently in maintaining the current system of wealth production. The reality is, while science is looking for the truth and can be considered as value neutral, innovation, which is the use of scientific knowledge to develop solution, has an agenda. So far it has been mainly used for power. And we would like now to see innovation more used for people and the planet. And then the second aspect is we wanted the use of innovation to serve people and planet to be more effective. And for that, there are challenges that need to be addressed. The first challenge is the lack of demand for climate and sustainability solution, which is mainly linked to the lack of moonshot thinking. When we are setting target and objective, we tend to set them based on our perception of what is possible. We do not set target and objective based on what is needed, but what is perceived as possible. And this is the problem for innovation, because this is precisely the creative tension between what is needed and what is perceived as possible, which is the main driver for innovation. Currently, we are locked in a vicious circle where those that are setting target and objective don't want to be ambitious because they do not see the solution available. And those that are developing solution are not working on the solution because there is no demand. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to break this vicious circle. The second issue is that innovation is mainly focusing at the sectoral level, where it aims at incremental change. This is needed, but definitely it will not be enough. We need to have more transformative innovation, and for that we need to go back to the ultimate need our different value chain are satisfying, and ask ourselves how innovation could be used to satisfy this need with alternative value chain that are aligned with the climate goal, that are able to deliver well-being to 10 billion people by 2050, that would contribute in enhancing biodiversity, supporting land regeneration, as well as fitting within the planetary boundary. We need to have a holistic view of all these challenges. The third aspect is when we are talking about innovation, we tend to limit innovation to technology. Technology innovation alone will not be able to address the big challenge that we are facing, sustainability and climate. We need to have a more integrated approach where innovative technology are combined with innovative financial instrument, innovative business model, innovative policy instrument, and very important, innovative cooperative approach. Because we cannot address the challenge that we are facing with innovation if we do not collaborate. Radical collaboration is needed. And what we wanted to have is a space where this radical collaboration can take place, where we can achieve what I will call a societal learning, where the different entities can come up with new pattern of working together and can reinvent themselves. This is why we have put in place a digital platform where we expect all the different entities to come and collaborate.
Wow, I love those ideas there. I love the moonshot thinking. I love the vicious circle that we got to break at the end-to-end value chain, and also the importance of collaboration and thinking beyond just technology. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Now going to move to Ian. Ian and Neo Capital. So Neo is probably a name you all know, very associated with Neo EV, one of the leading electrical vehicle companies. And Neo Capital was set up by the founder as an investment firm with a strong sectoral focus on automotive and energy, and to bring innovation into decarbonisation and digitalisation. So I wondered, Ian, if you would be kind enough to walk us through the investment strategy that Neo Capital has today in terms of promoting climate technology, and also how you see the future role of mobility in the climate tech landscape. So over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine. And it's great to be on this panel with Sir Danny and other distinguished panelists. want to first thank AIIB for trusting us and being an LP for the fund that we manage. And to answer your question, what we do at Neo Capital is to focus on investing in technology transformations, which are fundamentally changing the automotive and the energy industries in China. And obviously, China is one of the largest emitters in terms of carbon emission, and energy sector is a big part of that, and transportation plays a role in that as well. And we're investing in technologies which are trying to solve some part of that problem. The focus on the technology transformation is in two areas. One is digitalization, and the more relevant to climate change is the decarbonization bucket of technology transformation. And for us, that means the electrification of the drivetrain. It means battery and other energy storage solutions. It means recycling, renewable energy, automation, which make manufacturing more efficient, and so on. I want to share with you one of the core theses of what we do here. At the center of all the investment is really the electrification of the drivetrain. In China, we've seen electric vehicle, now the adoption rate has really accelerated. 2 years ago, the penetration of new energy vehicle was about 6%. Last year, 16%. Now it's getting to 30% penetration of new energy vehicle. We actually think all the passenger vehicles will become electric in the foreseeable future. Machineries will become electric, motor-driven, electricity-driven. Commercial vehicle will be also become motor and electricity-driven. So that's a very fundamental change, and we're investing in that thesis. If all the vehicles are turning to be battery-based, electricity-driven, China now has about 300 million vehicles that will increase. And to charge all of those vehicles, it will require a day of energy generation, right? Think about the scale of that. But the reverse of it is if all the vehicles are fully charged, they can supply the country with 1 day of energy consumption. So that is the scale we're faced with. And think about vehicle to grid technologies, and also, the batteries, because of the scale electric vehicle has been generating, the cost reduction of energy storage in lithium-ion and also other type of energy storage solutions, which is very important for the adoption of renewable energy. I think Charmaine mentioned in the beginning, now renewable energy is grid parity. I think in China, it reached that number in 2019. So solar now basically, if widely adopted, it will not increase the cost of the economy, except it needs large adoption of energy storage. And this is made possible with the adoption of electric vehicle. So that's one of the core theses of our investment is the electrification of the transportation system and the relevance of energy storage, as well as the accelerated adoption of renewable energy. The other part, I think, as a private investor, one of the core competence for our firm is to really seek top entrepreneurs and encourage them to build business in this ecosystem. We've seen great technology innovations, but those technologies need great entrepreneurship to go to market. And we're happy to report there are tremendous entrepreneurship in China. We've seen top business leaders coming into this industry, building very successful business and very innovative business model as well. And as a venture capitalist and a private investor, one of the core competencies is to really build that system and encourage more entrepreneurship to bring innovative technologies to solve climate problems.
Thank you, Ian. And wonderful examples, actually, of how technology really has been scaled. The vision behind that, back to the vision point again, and we've really managed to do it in renewable energy and mobility. But I guess there are also many areas that are left without the technology and innovation that they need. And I'd really like to spend the next section of this time that we have together to sort of talk about those. Where are there gaps that we need if we're going to address climate in a real way through technology and innovation? Where are those gaps, and what do we need to do to unlock those gaps? So let's move from mobility, particularly Western world focus, but clearly not only, but move to, where are there other gaps and, around the world as well, and what do we need to do about those? And I'm going to start there with Danny, if I may.
Thank you very much. I think the logic that Masamba was applying to this issue is brilliant. And in a sense, it relates to several of the gaps. The point that there's a gap around kind of 0 to 1 innovation. What are the genuinely new technologies that haven't been thought of yet, or that are in the brains of some scientists but haven't been unlocked? That are going to contribute to solving the climate crisis, and how do we drive investment into those new technologies? So, in a sense, that's also what Jay's fund is doing. It's trying to find these new ideas. But there is definitely a gap in terms of how those really innovative, cutting-edge technologies are financed and get to a point where they can then be commercialized. And I think there is a role for MDBs in that space. Second is scaling up and then driving the kind of one-to-many innovation, where as Neo was talking about, there's something which is established, but there's a lot of innovation to come, and funds like Neo are really driving that, I think, very impressive. Again, I think there are gaps also in that space, but I think the third gap, which is in a way the most important one in the context of this conversation, is how do we spread the application of these technologies quickly? So, it took, solar energy has existed for a long, long time, right? But it really only became mainstream after 2010, when engineering advancements brought the production costs down to a sufficient point that they could be scaled. But the next technologies are not going to be able to wait. We can't wait for the next technologies to take decades to go from a bright idea to a smart innovation, something that can be delivered at the cost that is necessary to be spread. And we can't wait years or decades for technologies to go from the country where it's invented, often but not always in developed countries, to being ubiquitous around the world. Those things have to happen much, much, much faster. And so I think there's a role for MDBs in the investment, in spreading those things, but I think there's also a role for MDBs in spreading the ideas and sharing the technologies. So we've created an infratech platform. The infratech platform is designed to be a way of doing exactly the last of those three, so that we can go to, and this isn't just about climate, this is about every area of infrastructure that we work in. We can go to clients who are working in a particular area, and we can say, here's a bunch of partners, here's an ecosystem, here's things that are going on where technology is being applied in your sector or in the area that you want to work in, and can we take these technologies, can you work with those companies, can we embed this in your projects at the start? So accelerating the spread of technology. So I think those are the major gaps, and there's a lot of work to be done to fill them all. Thank you.
I don't know what the audience feels, but I'm really interested to hear, where are the spaces in the climate world where we actually most want technology to move next? So we've gone a long way in renewable energy and mobility. And I just wonder, Masamba, whether that's something that you guys look at and think about as well, because and then we can move on further into the financing of it. But it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
No, that's a very important point, and one of the key focus of the Global Innovation Hub because we would like to signal out what are the issues on which the solution developer need to focus if we want to address the climate and sustainability challenge. So what we are doing is, because we want to have a need-based approach for innovation, we start from 5 core human needs. One is nutrition and health, another one is shelter, another one is access, and then leisure and clothing. And then we take a backcasting normative scenario. We translate the need into product and value chain. So for example, in the case of nutrition and health, because we don't want anybody to be left behind, our starting point is in 2050, we will have 10 billion people. What are the need for nutrient for these 10 billion people? What does it mean in terms of food? And what does it mean in terms of value chain? And what are the innovations that are required for the development and upscale deployment of the forward-looking value chain, the value chain of the future? Because we know that some of the current value chain do not fit in a 1.5-degree world. That's a very important aspect. And if you undertake this exercise, you will identify that some specific food like bean are extremely important, because all these value chains that can produce protein in an alternative manner are extremely important for the future. And if we take the core human need of shelter, we will see that bamboo and 3D printing are something that is extremely important to look at closely. If you take the core human need of access, because we talk about mobility, but mobility is not a core need. Mobility is a means. The need behind mobility is access. Then the question is, how do we address the need of access, and what are the technologies that are absolutely needed to be able to satisfy the need of access in a way that is aligned with the climate and sustainability goal? And then we will see the digital technology. And among the digital technology, one of the most powerful and the most promising is quantum computing. It will make the speed of computers more than 100 million times faster than our current computer. And what is interesting there is that it will allow us to mimic the way nature is developing things, and this is extremely powerful. If you take now the energy sector, which is relevant to all these core human needs, the value chain of green hydrogen is a very promising one, and the innovative solution that will help develop and upscale the value chain of green hydrogen are also something we need to work on. Unfortunately, we need to recognize that we are very good on developing solutions to maintain current value chain. But when it comes to developing solutions for new value chain, we are less good.
We're back to those moonshots again, aren't we, Masambe? But yeah, look, wonderful. And I'll just make a little plug here for some reports which are being launched this week with HLC, and BCG's been supporting them and really looking at the different systems, such as food and agriculture, such as human settlements and shelter and so forth, and looking at the needs, as you say, which is where we need to start. And we've been looking at the financing and the planning behind that, so watch out for those links coming out. But thank you for that. Maybe, Jay, you want to come in on this. I mean, here are the needs. How do you think about that from a financing point of view, and fostering more technology innovation at this point? And we'll move on to scaling up.
I found this conversation incredibly enlightening. I love the system level thinking that's coming out here. And if this is the implementation COP, I wish it were described as the imagination COP or the innovation COP. And I also take the point very seriously that to simplify the idea of innovation in a technology alone is missing the point. We need innovation in financing, innovation in engagement, innovation in how we actually approach this. And I really like Sir Danny's point here that part of the innovation is innovating about how we're thinking about time, right? So we need to think about time as much shorter than we previously have. And if you think about it as an economist, you might say, look, if we're optimizing for risk return, we need to optimize now around time adjusted risk return, because the amount of time that we have is a lot less than we previously assumed, right? That means we need to scale a lot faster. Now, I give 3 quick answers to your question, Sherman, and one of them is a reframing. I think of gaps from the entrepreneurial side as opportunities, as challenges, like where is the demand going to be? If you need to feed 50 billion people, whoever figures out how to do that in a way that generates a sustaining business is going to be an enormous business, right, from the point of view of entrepreneurship and technology. And in terms of thinking about innovation, the challenge I have for you is almost a little bit of a backwards and forwards time machine thought experiment, right? So what Neo said today, if you thought about yourself, go back and think about yourself in the middle of the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. If you were at a presentation where it said, I'm raising hundreds of millions of dollars fund because electric vehicles are the inevitable future of all mobility, you would have thought in 2008 and 2009 that you were insane. You would have been laughed out of the room, right? And that's true, right? And the curves that were driven to levelize cost of energy, that solar electricity would be the cheapest cost of electricity on the planet Earth, there was a lot of uncertainty around that too. But now we believe electric mobility is inevitable, right? So the question is, when we look forward in the future, if we came back, I hope there's no COP27, so let's just imagine where we might be in 10 years. Hopefully we'll have solved it by then. But what are the things when we look back from that position that we could feel were commonplace and inevitable now? Of course, that's common sense, right? Whether it's hydrogen or alternative protein sources for foods that you actually like to eat, as opposed to that you eat because you feel it's good for the planet, right? Or a healthier lifestyle, or a more integrated, more biodiverse way that we're building buildings or building cities, right? So the challenge of imagination is a time machine, because when you look backwards, you know that the world has revolutionized itself. And when you look forward, the question is, how do you revolutionize it? So I'll give you the 2 practical examples of innovation that I think can help illustrate this. One is a company called Source Global, and Rob Bartrop is here in the back of the room. Source Global is a company that the Kraft Fund, supported by AIIB and others, invested in, specifically to help accelerate the standing up of their manufacturing capabilities in Malaysia, right? To expand the development of the resources there and to deploy their technology in Malaysia and about 50 other countries around the world. That's where the technology is deployed. What Source has produced is what they call a solar hydro panel. So this looks basically like a solar PV panel. It's about the same form factor, shape, and size and weight. But instead of generating electricity, it generates pure drinking water almost under any atmospheric conditions around the world. So it uses a proprietary material that adsorbs water vapor from the air. The sun is distilling water all the time, and then it condenses it and produces drinking water, about 6 to 9 liters drink water per panel anywhere in the world. And so that technology is a kind of systems change technology. It's not desalination plus 1% improvement in efficiency every year. It is moving to an entirely different method of generating water from the air, not from the ground, not from underground or from surface ground, from the air itself. And this allows you to move from a Roman architecture approach to water systems. We bring a giant pipe, on an aqueduct all the way here. Instead, you can have locally distributed generation of water, just like we have locally distributed generation of power, right? And so looking at the analogy to solar PV, if you can ride down the cost curve for generating water in the same way that you can ride down the cost curve for generating electricity, then are thinking about how water can be delivered in remote communities on a distributed basis, on a 100% renewable, sustainable basis, by putting on your rooftop, putting it in fields, putting it in different configurations, allows us to take our imagination and take the electricity sector and apply it in the water sector. Now, if you look at any IPCC report, any NDA, any NDC, any list of the requirements and the aggregation of them in 2050, I believe water is at the very top of that list. Drinking water and then broader use of water. 70% of use of fresh water is agriculture, right? This is a drinking water solution, but there's other solutions that are out there. So that is where we're going in the future. The support of the Craft Fund is to scale up that technology, to provide equity capital to scale it up so that we can increase the amount of capability for that company to scale up and drive that volume going forward. The second innovation, the innovation we came at COP to announce, is in Glasgow, as I think Sir Danny knows, we announced the launch of a technical assistance facility alongside the Craft Equity Investment Vehicle. And this is a grant mechanism that is supported by the Nordic Development Fund and the US State Department. It's only about $4 million right now. But what it's designed to do is to take those technologies that are supported in equity and bring them as fast as possible today to low-income countries, small island developing states, and the vulnerable populations in other developing countries that would not ordinarily be the target of a commercially driven deployment of technologies. Those countries are, in many cases, too poor or too small or just not a normal expansion strategy. You would eventually get the technology there as it rides down the cost curve, but it might be years from now. And those people need the technology right now. And so by using grant funding to structure pilots to prove out different ways to deploy the technology, you can basically reach forward in time to where the technology would eventually get deployed and deploy it today instead. So we announced, after making that commitment at COP26, that by COP27, at this conference, that facility is operational. We've launched the first 2 projects on the ground, deploying those solar hydro panels in 2 communities in Papua New Guinea that have never had pipe drinking water, where women and girls disproportionately are impacted by the need to go get water. Well, the alternatives are bottled water or high sugar drinks, which cause all kinds of health impacts, unintended consequences. And we're piloting with that grant funding pay-as-you-go water, just as we dramatically increased deployment of solar electricity through pay-as-you-go electricity. We had to initially pilot the business model so you could finance the water being generated, just like you financed the power being generated over a 25-year period. In this case, it's a 15-year strategy. And if we can prove that pay-as-you-go water works in a pilot, you can scale it immediately, do traditional project financing, 70-30 strategy. We've seen all this before in electricity. Let's apply it in the water sector. And so that innovation is an innovation of finance to a technology which has its own cost curve and bring it forward to a point now where we can deploy it immediately. The challenge that I would lay out for everyone else is we're doing this with a very small technical assistance facility, about $4 million. The first project is launched at $500,000. We're going to do other projects like with other technologies also supported by the Craft Fund in agriculture, in the supply chain, in healthcare. If you had a $100 million technical assistance facility, you could, we calculated somewhere between 10% of the population of the SIDS could have drinking water on a renewable, sustainable basis. And you could probably start deployment of that by COP28. Okay? So when the challenge of time is, we have all these instruments. Every MDB has every single instrument. You have grants, you have guarantees, you have loans, you have structured finance, you have blended finance, you've got technical assistance advisory capability. And the way we typically deploy them is we optimize for risk, and so we blend that finance over a long period of time. We start with a $500,000 project, a $1 million project, then a $5 million project, $10 million project. At OPIC, we did the first $1 million 1 megawatt project for Azure Power in India. First independent grid-connected solar project. That company went on to deploy 3 gigawatts of solar, okay? What if we could compress the time, right? What if instead of piloting $500,000 at a time, we said, look, if these 3 pilots work, we're gonna deploy 50 million, 100 million. We scale it fast, right? And we aggregate the demand, so you pull back the cost curve to today. So instead of waiting for the volume to get to the cost, so part of it was engineering, Sir Danny, but part of it was volume. The winner in the solar PV, solar electricity universe was traditional polysilicon PV, right? It wasn't the most advanced technology, but by getting to volume, it collapsed the cost of it, right? So there are innovations that are out there. There are instruments that we're using. Source is a technology company. The TA facility is an innovation in financing. The other innovation could be scaling that financing or bringing it back or accelerating the time frame to actually deploy things. We have the capability of doing this, and so that's why I think it's a gap, yes. That creates an opportunity and a challenge for people to actually bring that energy and innovation to this question, because 10 years from now, we could all be looking back and saying, oh yeah, of course it's inevitable that we have both traditional water supplies, but also these alternative technologies. That's a part of the mix, right? For these communities, we have solar panels. For these communities, we have, you know, much more better groundwater reuse. We can imagine that future. I hope we reach that future, but we're only going to get there if we imagine it, shoot for it, right? Aim for it. That's why I love the systems thinking that the Global Innovation Hub is doing, and the kind of work that BCG is doing, and say, look, what do we need to get to? Where's the destination? And then we can find the route to get there. But the destination's not going to get there if we only think about just the next step, and we don't think about how to get to the final solution, right? Anyway, sorry for taking so much time.
Jay, I think it's fantastic, and I think it's a point that every time we talk to, you know, as mentioned earlier, this irrigation systems, and you know, with 80 million, 100 million, you could scale it up to all of the farmers in Kenya and change the paradigm, but the time it's going to take at the current level of, you know, we won't get there. So, and we have to be saying, if we look back in 5 years' time, what we know needs to happen now. So how do we get the financing to support these innovations and the scale up? So, yeah, it's really powerful. I want to give the opportunity to Ian and Jackie, just while we're on this topic of scaling up and how do we make it happen, and then we will focus a little bit more on role of MDBs. But is there anything, and maybe what you could put your hand up if you have something to say. Your physical hand would be easier for us to see if either of you would like to come in there. Ian, please.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just quickly add to Jay's point earlier.
I think you're on mute.
That, so I give you an example of in the space that we invest in. You heard of battery swapping solutions, right? Battery swapping solutions for electric vehicle or for two-wheelers. This is definitely a very viable technology because it increases the you know, the usage of batteries, which, by the way, is the most important and most costly component in vehicles. It can be 40% of electric vehicle cost or maybe more. If it's used across different vehicles, it can be generating 3 times the mileage and maybe even more than that than the battery that's not shared. So to us, this is actually a very proven model. But in order to have car makers and battery manufacturers and swapping station operators to all work together, it's a very elaborate coordination work. Also, it requires significant amount of capital to build out the infrastructure to enable battery swapping solutions in a city or in certain relatively confined area. Which I think a lot of things can be done because it will reduce costs dramatically for the entire ecosystem. NEO obviously have tried on its own with using equity money to build a battery bank as a first attempt to start generating data for batteries in terms of battery banks. And then after the initial success, and then banks came in and start to finance the battery bank. But I think in the future, there can be a lot more things to be done. If we're talking about migrating technologies like this from China to other part of the world, in developing world particularly, to adopt electric vehicle or electric motorcycles, I think having innovative finance to build up not just the technology component, but also the infrastructure to enable the adoption of the technology is quite important.
Thank you. Very, very well put and understood. And yeah, Jackie, why don't you come in now too on that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, one of the things that we've seen, I mean, hearing to Jay and even to Ian, I mean, remarks right now comes to my mind, which is the timing that we have as investors or our private investors, so to support this, I would say, technology shift. Okay, when we looked at these entry barriers, which are basically infrastructure cost. I mean, Ian was talking about battery swapping. Okay, we all remember, I think, Better Place. Okay, I think 10, 12 years ago, I mean, they tried, but the industry was not there. I mean, the car industry was not ready, the infrastructure was not ready, the cost of implementing, I mean, these battery swapping stations was too high. And at that time, as Jay mentioned, so 10, 12 years ago, I mean, electric vehicles was not really on top of mind of I mean, consumers, customers, or even car makers. So the question for us as investors is really the time for a company addressing this type of concerns is how they can scale, okay? How they can basically generate revenues, whereas you need to continuously invest in infrastructures, in investing in building, I mean, the basis for the technology, I mean, to thrive or for technology to innovate. So this is where I believe, and I think maybe I guess we will address that in the next session, is you know, how public I mean, governments or public institutions, you know, can help to find the balance between public and financial investors. So to make sure that the technologies that today's will address or will address in the future the needs, and I think that I mean the needs are pretty clear right now, but it's really how to make sure that we can not only fund those companies but also wait until they find the market fit. And again, I was mentioning the example of Better Place, which is a company that we had the opportunity to look at from an investment perspective back then, and say, okay, but you know, how much time for a company like that will need for the market to be ready, okay, so to adopt this type of technologies. And at the same time, as an investor, so we always look at short-term return, and I think we need to find the balance between the short-term return and the scale and the adoptions of these new technologies, because there is a faster now need, and the time frame are continuously, I think, reducing. When we look at, you know, I mean, EVs are a great example. I will not talk about the other examples, but even we mentioned, I mean, natural catastrophe. I mean, natural catastrophe. This is something that is happening today everywhere, not only in developing countries, but I mean, in more advanced countries. It's something that we've seen that. But for companies, so really to and here I'm talking about really potential customers of this type of technologies. They are still looking at legacy players because it's so costly to shift from, I would say, an insurance which covers all type of needs to something we would just address, I mean, climate risks insurance. So I think that, I mean, with this couple of examples, what I'm trying, you know, to emphasize is really the need to find that balance. And this comes with the support of governments, public money, and of course with the mindset of private investors, that this is what can provide the best returns for investors, as I mentioned before in my previous remarks.
Thank you, Jackie. We keep coming back to the same points, don't we, around how we don't have much time. We can't rely on the existing way of doing things and funding things. So maybe I want to leave time for Q&A, but before I do that, we wanted to address, as you say, how do we think about public and private sector financing, but particularly focusing on MDBs. So what would be the one or two things, or how do we think what should the role of MDBs be in both fostering new innovation, the right innovation, and in scaling it up? So if you had to pick one or two things that you think MDBs could do differently, more of, less of, what would they be? And I'm going to start with you, Masamba.
I think two things will be really important. The first is we need more money for the MDBs. They do not have enough financial resources. And then they need to use better this public finance to leverage private finance. Because we know that finance are available, but they are not accessible at the expected level to sustainable activities. We need also to combine, because we need to work simultaneously on all the leverage points. We need to combine technology pull policies that are acting at the user of technology with more technology push policy. And this combined with more combination of private and public finance can help move forward.
Very clear. Jay, what would be the two things you would say?
Well, we're very proud to have really visionary and leading MDBs like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, like the European Investment Bank, like the Green Climate Fund in its own multilateral way, the Nordic Development Fund. These are all investors that took the risk and had the vision to support the first private investment fund for adaptation and climate resilience. I mean, it's surprising again to say those words, but it's true. Now we hope hundreds of these funds will be created, just as we had the first renewable energy fund, and then we have hundreds or thousands of renewable energy. We want it to be the same kind of, it's commonplace that people, of course we're investing in adaptation, what flavor, what place, what sector, what stage. And so, you know, if I had to open the challenge for MDBs, and I think AIIB's got this great phrase, they want to be lean, clean, and green, right? Lean, clean, and green. And if you could imagine for a moment, suspend your disbelief, and you thought, wow, MDBs are the fastest, most flexible, most innovative solution providers out there. If we could imagine that that future could exist, anything that could get us faster to that future would be a good thing. So the two practical suggestions I have are this. I think blended finance at scale, with speed, I think that we have a blended finance strategy. It's the only way we are able to crowd private capital into the first strategy for adaptation and climate resilience. I think that is an innovation. If it works, scale it. Do it 100 times larger than you did before. We've already talked about this TA facility we have. It's 4 million. It could be 100 million. You could deploy that very quickly. If you can prove the business model, prove the technology, then accelerate it. So thinking about compressing the time, I think is the most critical thing. And the last piece I would say is almost flipping to this systems level view. I'm very taken by the strategy that's outlined here. Because if you look at the tools in the toolkit, grants, guarantees, loans, structured finance, technical assistance, advisory, equity, funds, structures, we almost start to silo ourselves into looking at the instruments and having the instruments determine what we're going to do by path dependence. If instead we looked at the goal, the system, and then said, we want to get there, taking all these different instruments and then joining hands with other MDBs, with other entrepreneurs, with the private sector, finding a way to speak the language of the private sector, with philanthropy, with scientists, said we all want to live in that world. If we don't do it right, we're going to incrementally end up living in that world. But then we took all those tools and imagine the house you want to build and use whatever tools you have to build the house, as opposed to saying, I've got a hammer, I've got to find a nail. I've got a saw, I've got to find something to saw. I think we can do that. And I think we have to do that because that is the challenge that we face. So this is a wonderfully convened discussion. I think the strategy and the kind of analysis that BCG, the systems level thing, we have to think forward in time now because we're going to face a future that is dramatically different than we are now. So I think those are my two suggestions.
Thank you. Lovely and practical. Jackie, I can see you first. What would be your two things for MDBs to do differently or more of?
No, I would say more, maybe not differently. I think what I mentioned earlier on, which is the infrastructure costs. So maybe to support light infrastructure. I think there is a differentiate between heavy infrastructure and light infrastructure. So I think in developing countries, I heard before like the leapfrog, of technology. So I think that this is something that cannot happen. I think as a general rule in this, this challenge that we have, regarding climate change, I believe that it needs to be addressed at least in developing countries. Replacing, the usage of coal, for instance, and having some kind of, supporting that shift, which might be less costly and less heavy than other type of infrastructures. And at the same time, when we look at what the government is doing in the US, with President Biden, announcing this 300 billion, to support, the shift towards, greener technologies, the support of, acquiring electric vehicles from the government. So everything has to be, I think, not only actually MDBs, but actually all the actors all the players of the ecosystems should be supportive in the different way that they can. So one is really to financing. The other ones, as I said, like for private institutions, is to have maybe a different return I mean, being less short return driven, because at the end, what we are seeing, and I think that what Jay mentioned earlier on about, I really like what Jay was mentioning. This is why I'm talking about a couple of times about his remarks, but really looking backwards, I mean, we are seeing that there is an adoption of this type of technology. So what we can anticipate is maybe not all the technologies of the future, but is that the market is moving, I mean, towards the usage of technologies which are enabling these climate and sustainability issues. So which means that as investors, as public investors, and also as private investors, so we can be now convinced that there will be a market, that there will be, I mean, revenues for the companies innovating in the space. So it's really just making sure that we have the infrastructure layers being supported by public institutions at a larger scale.
Got it. Thanks, Jackie. Ian, your one or two things?
Sure, I have two things, one fast and one slow. So the faster one, I think, is for things I mentioned, which technologies and ecosystem that's already proven in one economy that can be transferred into another region with the assistance of organizations like AIIB in a much faster fashion. I refer to electric vehicle, electric motorcycle. I think those systems now can already be migrated because they're already proven in certain part of the world, like China, with the help of MDBs to build out infrastructure, which reduce a lot of the adoption problems. I think that's one angle. By the way, AIIB is already working in that area. The second suggestion is to take a slower approach, particularly with very innovative technologies. For example, we're looking at fusion technologies to solve energy problem. It will require capital with a lot more patience. The current fund structure with a 8 to 10 years term may not be the best organized to solve those type of problems. So if MDBs have that kind of funding avenues to fund more longer term technology development, which is so important for humankind, I think that will be tremendously helpful as well.
So it's for you, Danny, to respond. Is that how you're thinking already? What does it say
Wow.
to you?
Okay. Thank you. There's some great advice here which I can't respond to in the little time we have. But I mean, number one, it's great to hear our own values, lean, clean, and green, being reflected back to us. Thank you, Jay. I think living by those values is already a part of it, an innovation in how this system can work. I mean, I think MDBs we have money, so how we invest it and how we use it is critically important. And I hear the points about scaling, about speed, about risk, about the mobilization of the private sector, about blending with others to offer more incentives where it's necessary, and about thinking about this systemic level. Thinking here we're talking about how to deliver global public goods on a global scale. And so project by project isn't enough. You've got to think about what are the right projects which are going to be impactful, which can be replicated and scaled. We've also worked AIIB in terms of capital market innovation, so that if you can do what we're, for example, doing through the Bayfront project in Singapore, which is try and accelerate the transition of infrastructure to being something that can be invested in as an asset class, then that unlocks a whole bunch of other financing from pension funds and insurance and so forth. Again, using our resources smartly to unlock much more. It's mobilization, but in a different way to how it's normally understood. MDBs have a lot of knowledge and should have a lot of knowledge, but in this space it means we really have to understand what's going on in the innovation space. What are the new technologies that are coming forward? What is the impact that they may or may not have? What maturity are they at? What finance do they need? And where are the key players at a country level and globally? And then how do we share that knowledge? How do we apply it in terms of technical assistance to help prepare projects? How do we share it with clients working in particular areas so that they can then adapt that technology or incorporate that technology into their investments? And then we have convening power. And we can bring people together. And I think this point that several colleagues have made about partnerships, about who do we work with, about who do we blend with, who do we bring together to deliver the operations is critically important. So we've just, in AIIB, set up a new operational partnership department because we know that this is an area we have to do a lot more in. But we call it operational partnership because we don't want to have partnerships that are just about talking. We want to have partnerships that are about resulting in projects and investment and finance being deployed on the ground. So how we use our money, how we use our knowledge, how we use our convening power, how we do so at scale, with speed, and taking the right levels of risk. Sounds easy, right? But I think these are, Masamba made the point also that there's a lot of discussion here and in other fora about getting more resources to MDBs. So MDBs are the part of the international financing system and the multilateral system that work and still work even under the current difficulties. So I think the idea that we should get behind MDBs as an even more important channel to deliver this change is a really important idea. But that will require everybody, both the institutions themselves, the governments who finance them, and the partners we work with, all to do more.
Wonderful summing up of your marching orders for the coming years. Let me ask the audience whether they have any questions, and if anybody online has questions, I'm sure they will be being collected in parallel. So,
thank you. Hello. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. So my question is to Jay. It's really exciting to see a private sector fund for adaptation. And as we all know, a lot of the common knowledge around adaptation is that these projects doesn't equal profitability. And so I'm wondering, how do you convince people on that? And my second part of the question is that how do you prioritize when you're selecting projects? And there's so much to be done in adaptation, and so, yeah, thank you.
That's great, and thank you for the question, because I think part of the challenge around adaptation is when we first looking at the question back in 2014, 2015, I think we had the same reaction that any normal human outside of the COP would have, which is, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what is that? Okay? It's like nobody gets up in the morning and goes to the store and buys a loaf of adaptation. You don't fill your car tank or you charge your car with a unit of adaptation. Like, that's just not a thing. And if you think about it, actually, you don't do that with mitigation either. I guess you can buy carbon credits, but you don't go up and go get a piece of of mitigation. You spread some jam on it and have it for breakfast. What you buy is food that is lower carbon in production. What you buy is energy that is renewable. And what we need to think about is buying food that is going to be resilient to the impact of climate change going forward, and energy and healthcare in the right places, and finding water that's low carbon and climate resilient and adapted, and build buildings that are lower carbon and adapted to the increasing. So the point is, adaptation is not like an object in space that you can buy. No one would go out and buy an adaptation. You don't go buy a mitigation either. We can think about adaptation credits. I have a whole theory about how to do that and think about that. But the first point is, what do we really mean? And so one of the things we did in 2020 with the support of the Global Environment Facility and the Inter-American Development Bank, it was to release a taxonomy called the Adaptation Solutions Taxonomy as part of the Adaptation SME Accelerator Project, ASAP. You can find this at climateasap.org. And we peer reviewed it to say, what do we mean by adaptation? What's a company that does adaptation? And we said, look, if you go to IPCC literature, German Watch literature, or now probably these reports produced by BCG, you can find a list of all the terrible things that are going to happen. Water, ag, healthcare, and so on. And that creates the risks and hazards in specific locations, specific durations. And any company that has a technology to help you understand that better, or any company that has a solution that can help you manage that better in a measurable way, that we define as an adaptation company. That's consistent with the European Union Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which is the only legal definition as what is adaptation. And the sectors that we're focusing on in the Craft Fund is designed to demonstrate what do you mean by that. So I'll give you the two other examples beyond the solar hydro panels company. You can certainly make money selling panels and generating water. But the other two companies we've invested so far, one is called Waycool Foods. This is an India-based company that is a food and agriculture supply chain management and solutions company. So in India, the food and ag distribution system is incredibly complicated and disorganized. It takes you about 13 steps to go from a farmer to a person to eat food. So the amount of wastage in the supply chain because of all these intermediaries is somewhere between 15 and 35%. 15 and 35%. Food is incredibly expensive to grow. It's very energy intensive, water intensive, and so on. And because there's 13 steps between the farmer and the farmer doesn't have really that much of an idea of what the consumer actually wants to eat. So you have these mismatches in supply and demand, which leads to more wastage and reduces income for farmers and a whole bunch of other things. And particularly in India, where there's millions of smallholder farmers, that's how the organization of the agriculture sector exists, that's a problem. So to take the innovation point, the team at Waycool came out of the automotive supply chain sector. When they looked at the supply chain for food, they said, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to collapse the supply chain to 3 steps, which is the steps that it takes in most OECD countries to get from a farm to a consumer. Most of the waste of food in OECD countries is after the consumer gets it. We throw a lot of food away. It's so precious per capita in developing countries that almost all the food wastage happens either on the farm before production or in the supply chain. So by applying the Internet of Things, software, services, visibility to the farmer across the distribution channel and to the actual end customer, they've collapsed the number of steps to 3 steps, and the amount of food wastage that they track now in supply chain is less than 2%, okay? Which is dramatic reduction in cost, which is what the business model really is, dramatic reduction in avoided GHG losses, because you're now not like just throwing away all this food in the supply chain, and they're now also engaging with the 200,000 plus smallholder farmers that they source food from to help improve their agronomy, help match supply and demand to the consumer so they're growing the right things at the right time. They're deploying weather sensors in the farms, so you have localized ability to manage now increasing drought, flood, storms, increased yields, increased livelihoods for the farmer. And what you get is kind of the Climate 2.0 result, which is reduced greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, and increased resiliency at the same time. So Chennai, where the company is based, went through the 3 waves of COVID that were a humanitarian disaster in India, right? Major shutdowns multiple times. Chennai ran out of water at the municipal level in 2019 because of drought. And Chennai, in November of last year, had a meter of water in the center of Chennai from excessive flooding. Through COVID, through drought, through floods, Waycool, because of its system and technology and its weather sensibility, was able to make 100% of its targeted food deliveries and became a major supplier during parts of the COVID crisis to local municipalities to make sure food was still getting to individuals during the supply chain. So this is a different way of thinking about the system. Instead of just putting armor around 13 steps in the supply chain, we're just going to build cement tubes around the supply chain to protect it. We said, no, let's apply technology, systems thinking, collapse it, add technology and capability. Think about it as a whole system, not just individual steps, but the food production, the food distribution, and this stuff. Company has grown 3 times since first look at the company, and I think this is how you actually think about a different way of thinking about the future. Do you think that company can make money? Do you think that company can generate a revenue process? Yes, because you're not buying the mitigation from the company or the adaptation company. What you're buying is the food that you need as you increase urbanization, increase population, increase stress on food production, and increase stress on the food and ag supply chain. So that is a business model that makes sense. We've also invested in a precision agriculture company called Salimtech in Brazil, which networks together farm production, reduces application of fuel, application of fertilizer, application of water, increases weather capabilities, so you actually now can manage that kind of capability. And to your point about irrigation, the one thing I would say there is one of the largest companies in the world that does drip irrigation is a company called Jane Irrigation, which IFC, Multilateral Development Bank, and OPIC, now USDFC, invested in when it was incredibly small. Now it's $1.3 billion in sales. What's kind of surprising is 90% of those sales are only in India. And if you can sell drip irrigation to Indian smallholder farmers, I think you can probably sell drip irrigation at that price point for those products almost anywhere. The trick is getting to the local communities and systems thing to deploy that technology in new places where that drought's now going to be excessive, like the Horn of Africa, like East Africa right now, which is suffering multi-year drought, like parts of Latin America, which have never had drought before, are now going to face drought. So the solutions are not necessarily only in the future, they're just in a different place, need to be brought there, transferred. So part of what we're doing is helping to transfer and accelerate that transfer. And if we can work with MDs, work with partners, work with thought leaders, or communities, then there are models for the future. But remember, you're not buying a loaf of adaptation, okay? What we need to do is do everything in a world that is resilient net zero, right? That is a climate 2.0 world where we get both at the same time. Deal with the effects of climate change and do it in a low carbon way. That's a future, that's a place I want to live, right? So that's what we're doing.
It's a place we all want to live. And this bringing together adaptation and mitigation critical. Maybe one last quick question and then we will have to close. Is there any burning question on anybody's minds? Okay, and I presume there's nothing online. So thank you so much. I think this has been an unbelievably stimulating conversation. We talked earlier about how during the COP period you arrive here, it's chaos, and then you get really depressed and think nothing's going to happen, and then as you start to move forward, certain themes keep coming through, and you start to see things in a different way, and all of us here start to see that. And I think, you know, the system thinking about finance in a different way, returns in a different way, getting it to different countries fast, the infrastructure point that was made, all these points, they're coming up and up and up, aren't they? And the role for MDBs, but not just MDBs, all of us in these rooms, is we need to act on this, and we need to take it beyond COP, because it's not enough just to be talking about it here. But let me not do more summing up than that, but to say thank you very much to everybody, and particularly to our panelists online and here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.